Hey everybody, welcome back to Choosers of the Slain. I'm Nate.
I'm Lucas.
And we are here with episode 17, a little bit more delayed than we had hoped, but we've got a couple of pretty sizable updates, so we'll jump right into it.
That we do.
First off, new releases are starting back up, which is always nice.
Yes, like a whole boatload of them.
Mm-hmm.
No Suez Canal jokes there, but
right.
It really feels like GW is trying to get the train back rolling again. And it feels like maybe they're attempting to make up lost ground. There is so much stuff. You got the individual kits from the Kill Team Pariah Nexus box. You've got the AdMech Codex and all the supplements that come with those type of releases, and then Lilith Hesperax on its own. A bunch of it's just a big pre-order weekend coming up this weekend.
Yep. And last weekend was the whole Soulblight Vampire Lords release for Age of Sigmar too. So they're just cranking stuff out. It seems like they're making up for lost time for sure.
Yeah. And with all of that, I mean, we just had the Warhammer Fest where we were seeing like teasers for the upcoming orcs and also, Age of Sigmar 3.0.
Mm-hmm.
There's just GW is releasing so much stuff. It's kind of provoked a lot of discussions in our Discord, also, just between us as players and hobbyists. And one of the questions that came up in our Discord discussions was what like obscure faction or what group that's referenced in the lore would you or I like to see added to the game. And we wanted to touch on this briefly. It's a great question, and we could probably do a whole episode on that very topic.
Oh, easily.
But we have in our local area here, and as well as on our Discord, we are getting a crusade started here soon. So probably our next episode, not promising, is going to be more lore specific, more kind of in development of that crusade, talking about our armies for it. So a full answer to this question, I think, belongs in that episode. But I would like to give a little teaser of it, and we talked about it beforehand. So we're each going to give one thing that we would like to see added to the game, and then in that episode where it kind of fits more, we will definitely expound on it. You'll probably hear a couple other ideas from us than these ones. So I'm going to put the ball in your court, Nate. What's the thing that you would like to see added, whether it's obscure or it's something that seemed promised at some point and then it never panned out? Like, what's something you want to see in 40K?
So I'm going to kind of cheat a little bit and say it's a toss-up for me.
I've done it before.
Longest standing answer for that question would be Eldar Exodites, because who doesn't want space elves riding dinosaurs? But it's actually a toss-up between that and Hrud for me. You don't see a lot about them, but they're a super sneaky kind of infestation kind of race that is intelligent and not mindless like the hive mind, and they use technology and everything instead of just biology. So I think they'd be cool to see a almost like a Skaven like faction is the way I've seen it referred to.
That's fair, and that's something I know that in the past they've like removed fantasy elements from 40K to try to separate the games. I mean, that's literally why Squats got canceled. It was not because it wasn't selling well. It was because they were trying to distance 40K from just space fantasy, and dwarves didn't seem to fit the setting. So I guess adding Skaven to 40K feels like it's kind of just opposite that, but that would be so cool. I think, I mean, you've already got rattling snipers. I would, instead of like scruffy hobbits, like if rattling snipers were actually Skaven, I think that would be amazing. So you made that image pop into my head. But I think a very like infestation, like dirty, not disease ridden like Nurgle, I think that would be a really cool addition to the game. For me, there is a species that gets talked about occasionally in the lore, but they were largely expanded upon in the Jericho Reach stuff for the Death Watch role-playing game, which is technically canon. It is oh man, now I'm forgetting their name. It's something like the Rachnar or the Rachnos or something. It's a very similar word to the name of the alien species from like Mass Effect or whatever. But it's like this hyper intelligent giant insect like scorpion monster race that
Oh
doesn't
yeah,
have
yeah,
spacefaring technology, and they scavenge things from other people, so all of their space travel is ripped off. That one has always seemed really interesting to me, but I feel like that's sort of just like another kind of tyrannid in a
yeah,
way.
yeah,
So that being said, I'm going to go very targetedly and say they need to add more stuff to the Tau by way of subjugated races.
yeah. More
So I don't
auxiliaries.
necessarily, yeah. So I think more so than a new faction, what I would like to see is more than Vespid and Kroot.
Hmm.
And the Tau in lore, the Tau get a lot of their technology actually from a race that is basically described as the Squats.
Yeah,
They're given a name, and of course at this exact moment it escapes me.
it's the demiurge.
Yes, the Demiurge. So the Demiurge is a nomadic fleet-based race that is from nearby the Tau homeworld, but their original place was devastated, and they're extremely like high-level craftsmen, and all of the Tau like plasma technology actually is theirs,
Hmm.
and all of the Tau spacefaring, like all their warp drives and stuff, all are Demiurge technology that the Watercast has purchased. And so not only do I think the Tau need more variety when their whole lore is that they subjugate species and have them join, but I think that's how the Squats get back into 40K.
Yeah,
I
that's
think,
been the ongoing rumor too.
yeah. And so that's mine. That's my top vote, is that I think the Demiurge specifically. I also think them being able to field guardsmen as like Gueva or whatever,
Yeah,
Guevasa, whatever their
yep,
word for it is.
yep.
It'd be cool if they could get like guard units, kind of like the Tyranid Gene Stealer cults get Brood
Hmm.
Brothers
Hmm.
for subjugated humans. But that's my vote. I know I went in the weeds a little bit, but that is my vote is Demiurge modeled to be very obviously more serious Squats added
Yeah,
to the Tau.
yeah. Almost like the Caradron overlords from Age of Sigmar.
Yeah, yes, a very like super high tech steampunky kind of
Hmm.
abhuman.
Yeah, I'd love to
Um,
see that.
yeah, that would be what I would want. That's my choice. There's tons of other things I could go into, but
Oh yeah,
I think
yeah,
that one needs to happen.
yeah, for
So,
sure.
so there is our initial answer for you guys. And like I said, we'll expound upon it more, but we wanted to give that kind of teaser since that question got asked.
Hmm.
Um, and as we move from new releases and answering that question to kind of our main topic for today, we still have to tell you guys about our experience at the Death or Glory Motor City Mayhem tournament.
Yeah,
Um, and we ourselves and Adaptive Subroutines Gaming all went to that, and we had a great time. It was a really well put together event.
for sure.
Um, and the for a couple of us returning to tournament play after a long hiatus, well, more than just like local for fun small tournaments, but
Hmm.
like to go to like real big competitive tournaments was a nice like kind of reinvigorating shot in the arm to our hobby, so to speak.
For sure.
So I guess that's the big overall thing I have to say. What's your big takeaway?
Um, it was really nice for me to get back into playing at a more competitive level. I've ever since we closed down our store, however many years ago that was now, 6 years ago or whatever it was. I have not played 40K all that seriously. It's mostly just been pickup games, with friends, just hang out, throw some dice, whatever, no big deal. So to kind of buckle back down into the real competitive side of it was a nice change of pace for me, and it's definitely reinvigorated some of my hobby drive that was starting to wane a little.
That's awesome. That's kind of the experience I had with it. Was I used to play competitive 40K pretty heavily back in the days when there were Rogue Trader tournaments, and they held like 6 grand tournaments across the United States every year. I used to play a lot, would travel around West Michigan, Southern Michigan. I would go over to Eastern Michigan. I went down to Chicago quite a bit. It was a big part of my hobby before, and for whatever reason, it just kind of faded away. And yeah, I like to play, I like to play hard in our local meta, with a little bit of competitive teeth, but generally speaking, I wasn't like traveling for tournaments or anything. And so it was nice to re-enter that world. There's a little bit of a culture shock with a couple things, just how some things have changed, but after I got my feet under me, it was kind of felt like old hat, and that was nice. The event itself, I think they did a wonderful job. I mean, you're always going to have some challenges here or there, whether it's a player or whether it's just kind of logistical issues, but overall, really well put together event, very approachable organizers. And it was a 109 person event, because I think at the last minute it was 110, and somebody at the last minute had to drop because they weren't feeling well.
Yeah, something like that.
And yeah, it was a pretty big spectacle. It was very, very fun to attend.
Mm-hmm.
There was one kind of standout part of the 109 people there, and that was a high prevalence of Drukhari players.
Yeah.
So now something that I am really happy to see is that of the three of us that went, you performed the best. You had the best overall standing of the three of us that went, and your Drukhari list used a real space raid.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something that a lot of the folks that have been maybe elbowed in the ribs over being a little cheesy with some of the abuses that they've taken out of that codex is not something that they did. So that's something I do want to definitely give you some props for doing very well as the group, and not running what could be accused of like the cheesy, basically just kind of the like, oh, you just net listed the newest codex.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was very happy to see that you did very, very well with like non-meta, maybe is the right way to put it, but
sure.
Taking a real space raid when that's not the triple patrol with the the juiced up succubi and all that stuff. So but it definitely, being at the front end of that wave of Drukhari shaking up the community, was an interesting experience to see it play out in real time.
Yeah, for sure.
Because that was, I mean, everybody has talked to death all of the changes and the things that need to be factored or added, or what they think about this, that, or the other. And and that's not really the road I bring this up to go down. I thought it was just a really interesting to see, like, one of the first big events that codex was in real time, and watching. I think there was something more down south like the week before, but
I think that was the first major that it was open for, though. The thing before was just a GT.
Yeah, and to watch like 100 people just gobsmacked by just the stuff that the codex was capable of, and just watching everybody go from like the range of emotion from like impressed to angry to just kind of, and it was such like the scuttlebutt around the tournament. It kind of made it almost a bigger spectacle, just because it was at the beginning of that wave. As a Drukhari player at the tournament, how'd that sit with you? I mean, did it affect the fun that you had, or affect your experience that everybody was starting to turn sour grapes?
No, not really. I had one game, I think, where somebody went, "Oh boy, Drukhari, like this is gonna be interesting," and it wound up being a game. It was one of them I didn't wind up winning, but it was a really good game, and I think very quickly, as soon as people saw I wasn't running Dark Technomancers, I wasn't running a Razor Flail Succubus, I didn't have 5 Raiders, I had 2. I think a lot of people went, oh, okay, this isn't the stuff that everyone's getting upset about. This is kind of a more general list. So there was less of that kind of perception that I was just running the list to abuse overly powerful things. And so I think that probably helped a little bit. But I also think that at that point we were only on like the second major event since the book had been allowed into competitive play, and so there wasn't as much of a as much of a harsh reaction to it. You know, it wasn't the next weekend where Dallas GT happened and there were 6 out of the top 10
I actually
lists
think it
were
was
Drew
7.
Carey. Was it 7? Yeah, it was.
Yeah, I think it was
crazy
7.
number.
It was like 7, a Marine, an AdMech, and was it Harlequin, and everything else was or something.
Oh no, it was mixed.
Oh, Chaos Soup.
Yep, there was Chaos Soup and there was Eldar Soup in there.
Yeah, but yeah, everything else was.
Yeah, I mean, it's just at that point everyone went, okay, this is a problem. Prior to that, it was kind of like, wow, these are really good. This is kind of crazy. It's an uphill battle. And then after that, it became a pretty clear indicator that there are a couple things in particular that really need to be addressed. But I don't think it affected my enjoyment of the event at all. I mean, I didn't come out anywhere near the top 10, that's for sure. But you know, it was a good time, and all my opponents were great. In
That's
fact,
cool.
Two of my favorite games of the weekend were the ones that I lost. They were both really good, close games with great opponents. So I had no complaints there.
Yeah, I definitely had a similar type game. One of the games that I lost was probably my favorite game of the tournament, because it was one of those games that was just nail biting 40K that came down to like the last die roll.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's, to me, those are the most fun games of 40K, where it's literally down to like, we're either going to tie or I'm going to win or you're going to win based on these like next 3 throws of the dice. And I definitely, my round 4 game was definitely one of those games that went all the way to the end, all the way to the last die roll, and it was just a squeaker.
Yeah.
You know, it was a really, really fun game. What I can say about your list though, in our practice games, the 3 of us and a handful of other players that were thinking about going but ended up not being able to go, kind of did some pretty heavy cross training in the couple months running up to the tournament. And I definitely, you know, had a pretty high opinion of how I was going to perform based on how those training games went. I had maybe one really hard fought, like really just drawn out game with adaptive subroutines that I ended up squeaking out by like, I don't know, 1 or 2 victory points or something like that.
Sure.
And then generally kind of ran the table for most of our practice games, except against your Drukari, which so like your army just shut me down in the games that we played. Yeah, it was very fun. And so I went to the tournament thinking like, okay, you know, yeah, I've been out of it for a while, and you know, and competitive 40K has changed a bit, and you know, I haven't, you know, I'm not expecting to win the tournament or anything, but I think I'll do all right. And I learned something very, very very, very important about the tactical employment of things in 9th edition. And that is, you really need to be scoring right away. Especially because one thing that we did with our training games is we were trying to push ourselves to play faster, but we didn't necessarily hold ourselves to a hard and fast time limit. And so I learned that the way I play my Bloody Rose sisters, they spend the beginning of the game kind of tearing the enemy out like weeds. And then I have the run of the table in the mid to late turns, and that's where I just rack up a bunch of points. You know, given unlimited time, unless I am just legitimately outplayed by a better player, or it's a matchup that's maybe a challenge for the sisters, I can pretty confidently say, if I make it till the end of the game, I'm going to get between 70 to 90 victory points, because you won't have anything left on the table.
Right.
The problem is turns 1 and 2, I earn virtually none. And so I found that in that tournament environment where you are really pressed for time and where you are fighting tooth and nail for everything, you can't necessarily afford to score late game. Right. You've got to be scoring all the time. And I think that definitely impacted my performance in the tournament, which was much lower than I had hoped, but it was still it was a lot of fun. I had a good time, and it also, a couple things that I needed to learn about the experience will definitely help me place better in future events.
For sure.
But that was the big takeaway lesson I had, was like, oh, the unstoppable juggernaut, like slow moving freight train approach that I had been taking. Not to say that my army acts like a slow moving freight train. I'm usually in your grilled cheese in turn one, but as far as from a victory point standpoint, it's like a slow build to like a cascade, so that like I essentially have the run of the table in late game, and you cannot afford to do that when you have a time limit. And so that was a big takeaway I had, was like, oh, there's like a fundamental change in my style I have to make when playing under the clock versus playing in a game where it's like, if we take a break for lunch or whatever and come back, like, it's those little like intangible tactics,
right.
that I need to just kind of nail down. And so I was very happy to have that experience, to kind of remind me, like, it's not just about slow play versus playing enough to be sportsmanlike. It's actually about, like, figuring the speed of your play into your tactics.
Yeah.
As far as like for scoring purposes. So that was a kind of my big takeaway lesson from it. And I really enjoyed that. I had one game that did time out because of some terrain issues. And that was kind of like culture shock, the culture shock piece that I referred to.
Yeah.
But that was not, the other player was not a bad sport. It was not a rough, it wasn't a rough matchup. It was just a logistics and time unfortunate, like nobody won kind of situation.
Right.
And the event organizers, did their best to try to talk that through and help everyone understand how it went down. So it was overall, it was a very good experience. Those guys over at Death or Glory put on a good show.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And I'm definitely planning on going again next time. Also along those lines, there is a kind of a movement in the region to kind of get together and organize games under a Great Lakes circuit. And I am proud to say that Studio Valkyrie and Valhalla Games and Sundries events, as well as future Choosers of the Slain events that we may put on, are definitely going to be under that banner. We've decided to hitch our wagon to that fledgling organization, and we're just super excited about the direction that will go with exposure, the ability to grow our local community, as well as to kind of attach ourselves to and be part of the greater regional community for 40K. And having seen how the guys at Death or Glory put on a major GT, I'm absolutely comfortable and happy with that arrangement and kind of hitching our wagon. So I know I'm doing a lot of talking, Nate. If you want to weigh on that, please go ahead. I could rant for a while.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. I'm really excited that there's a Valhalla tournament coming up. Mid-June?
Yep, June 19th, the first Wild Hunt GT.
Yeah, so and that
sorry,
RTT.
Yeah, RTT, not GT. And, Wild Hunt RTT.
And we've got some people that were at MCM that are going to be coming to that. The competition's looking like it's going to be pretty stiff. So it's nice to see people outside of our local meta getting involved with that kind of thing. Our local meta tends to be pretty heavy on chaos to an extent and Marines. That's just kind of the way it is. There's not a ton of Xenos players that are playing regularly, at least. So it's nice to see some varied factions coming up and get games in against different people. And I'm definitely excited to see what the future holds in terms of the Valhalla events and the potential Choosers of the Slain events. Some of the stuff that we've talked about potentially coming up in the next couple of years. I think there's a bright future there, and I agree wholeheartedly that the Motor City Mayhem tournament was exceptionally well run. And I'm thrilled to kind of be in league with those guys in terms of just kind of sharing that publicity and being part of that up and coming circuit.
Yeah, definitely. the big thing that I'm so very proud of, as far as our local meta, is the kind of level of excitement and support that we experienced with the three of us. It felt very much like um, like when your high school football team goes to state, and everybody's like putting the signs on the road and stuff,
Yep.
But we had a whole cadre of people in the Discord just following every game and like talking about our scores as they were being posted. And it made, we can't thank you guys enough. It made the event so much more fun to just like, I could be mid-game and my phone is just blowing up with notifications about how, Adaptive Subroutines game went, or how your game went, or whatever, because you guys already finished and I was still playing, or and it just having that support and having everybody back here in West Michigan kind of having fun following along like they were watching Sports Center or something was very, very fun. And so, the community that we're building here through the podcast and through our Discord is just a really, really positive, like fun community. And I think that that's, something that I'm very proud of.
Oh, for sure.
So much so with excitement that there are so many people on the wait list for the Wild Hunt RTT that there is a good chance that I'm going to be just doing another copy of it like 2 to 3 weeks later.
Nice.
And just starting like offering it to the people on the wait list first. Sure. Because I just right now, not having a location other than the store to hold the event, I'm limited by how many tables I can fit in Valhalla right now. But we easily could have run twice the size of a tournament.
Oh, wow. Nice.
So the just from the people who are just coming out of the woodworks who want to get involved now that we're moving in the direction of being more active in the organized play space, but also already kind of reaping the benefits of the connection with the Great Lakes Circuit, because once the information for the Wild Hunt was posted and I got that information over to the guys at Death or Glory, it just shot across the state, and we have people coming over from, quite a drive to play in the tournament. And there are people on the far side of, like the next city over are reaching out to me saying, hey, if somebody drops, let me know, 'cause I'll make the drive to play in that tournament. So it's just, it's taken off faster than I thought it would. And the reason why that's happening is because of you guys, because the community that's rallying around us. We truly appreciate that you guys are enjoying the content we're making. We appreciate that you guys are jumping, both feet into this little corner of the world, corner of our hobby community. I mean, I could gush for a while, so I'll stop myself. But thank you.
Yes.
You're definitely making this worth doing.
Absolutely.
So I want to bring us, as we kind of bring this episode to a close, I wanted to hit on one more point that was brought up by our users in Discord, because we had a whole bunch of questions for episode topics come up. And since we were talking about the tournament, our experiences at the tournament, one of the questions that we were recently asked was, have you ever dealt with a that guy player? And how did you deal with that, or how did it affect the game, or what was your takeaway? So I'll ask you first, Nate.
Yeah, so normally I'm that guy. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
He's not. He's totally not.
I really try not to be. I have dealt with a couple. I didn't have any at MCM.
Well, I know that Bloody Rose Sisters player in our local meta is kind of...
Yeah, I mean but it's Bloody Rose Sisters, so you just gotta kind of ignore it. Some people might argue that I'm a that guy when I play Drukhari, but I'm not bringing Dark Technomancer rocks. I'm not spamming Raiders, so I don't know what your problem is. It's not my fault. Dark Lances are cheaper than they should be, but yeah, it was. So in 40K specifically. It has been quite a while. It wasn't our local meta. It was a group I played with over a decade ago. And there was one player in particular that I take that back. There were two players in particular that that I could very easily consider a that guy kind of player for different reasons. One of them was the sort of player that when things were going their way, it was because they were really good at the game and they were outplaying you. And when things were not going their way, it's because your codex was too strong.
But that totally makes sense. I mean, that tracks with my experience. Anyway.
Right. That's how that logic goes. And that in and of itself, like if that's the way you think, that fine, whatever. Like that's honestly not that unusual of an opinion. People tend to downplay their failings and overestimate their ability. Like that's a thing.
It's definitely a human trait.
Yeah. The issue was that he was very vocal about it in both directions. And so when dice rolls were good, somehow it was because he was good. It wasn't because he rolled 4 dice and 3 of them were 6s. It's because he was so good at his army. So obviously the dice were just doing what they were supposed to. And,
that makes sense.
And when things didn't go his way, it's not because you were good. It's because your stuff is broken and you should feel bad for playing it. And you know that is never a fun kind of opponent to play against. It's just not. I would much rather play a game where I'm losing and it's because either my dice are going bad or because I'm just not playing as well as my opponent. I'm getting outplayed, whatever it might be. I would take a game like that where I'm still having a good time over a game that I'm winning hand over fist, and the whole time my opponent's sitting there going, well, your book's dumb. Your book's dumb. Your book's dumb. Like, okay, great. So not only are you getting defensive about the fact that you're not doing so well, but on top of that, you are immediately saying that it's not because I'm an okay or even good player. It's because my book is too good, and were it not for that, I wouldn't be able to win. Like at that point, it's whether you intend it this way or not. What you're saying is coming across as a personal insult, and that's just not. It's not sporting, you know.
Yeah, for sure.
It's not. The other player, it's a much shorter explanation, and it's simply that they loved dice shenanigans, and very frequently you'd get a roll where it was 40 dice and they would need, say, 5s to hit, and lo and behold they'd get 28 hits, but you wouldn't see most of the dice because they had already scooped them up off the table.
So a fast picker-upper.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually gonna ask, like, how did the dice shenanigans manifest? Because something that I will often see is when it comes to cocked dice and re-rolling them, when someone picks and chooses whether or not the die roll is cocked based on whether or not they want to keep the number that's showing. So I wasn't sure exactly what you meant when you said dice shenanigans, but yeah, the quick scooper upper is definitely a tried and true that guy method.
And it was more than that. It was throwing more dice than you were supposed to, or
to riff on modern or contemporary, hot news or whatever. So he was just straight up TJing.
Yeah. I mean, it's, and the worst part about it was then if your dice rolls didn't go well, this individual was very pleased with that and was not afraid to show that by excessive facial expressions and general movements that some have compared to dancing. Yeah.
I love it. Some have compared to dancing because it couldn't actually be called dancing.
Well,
fair enough.
What about you though?
I wanted to follow up just so those two situations. So those are that guys that you've dealt with. How do you, those two specific things, when you've got the the invalidator, we'll call him,
Mm-hmm.
who says that your successes are because you're cheating, basically, or not cheating so much, but your successes are because you're benefiting from a privilege of some kind,
Mm-hmm.
and that his failings or that his successes are because of skill, and that his failings are also your fault. So we'll
Right.
call that type of that guy the invalidator.
Sure.
And then we'll say the call the dice shenanigans person dice monger, whatever we want to call them. How do you
Sure.
deal with
I
those
mean,
two
I think
guys?
cheater is an effective way to refer to that.
Fair,
last
fair,
one,
but just for
sure.
yeah, okay, we could call him a dice cheater.
Sure.
So how do you deal with those two?
So the short answer is I don't unless I have to. Those were both people that ultimately I would only play games with if it was an event where I didn't have a choice of an opponent. In fact, there were days that I would actively turn down games where I was looking for one because the only available opponents were one of these people. And I'm firmly of the opinion that no 40K is better than bad 40K.
Fair enough.
It's just such a time investment that if I'm going to spend 3 hours not having a good time, I'm going to go like do my taxes or something. And at least then I'm being productive. But when I'm stuck in those games, I think the biggest thing to do, for one thing, if you're in a tournament and someone's fudging dice rolls and stuff like that, call a judge. Just call a judge.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Call them on it. Call a judge. And that's just, and it's easier now because there's so many games that are live streamed, and it's, I mean, we're talking about a time back when smartphones were barely a thing. Like now it's just a totally different landscape. But when it comes to stuff like that, just call a judge.
Yeah, I think that's the most important thing, and thank you for calling it. For calling a spade, as it were. Is like when you're dealing with Dicey McCheaterface, there isn't a good diplomatic, or there isn't we'll take the higher road type of response. If you paid money to be in that event and somebody is trying to cheat you out of it, that's what the judge is for.
Yep.
It doesn't mean that you're being salty. It doesn't mean that you're being a bad sport. It means that you're holding somebody accountable to the ethical standard that we're all supposed to have, the social contract of being in the tournament. So I appreciate you naming that, because that is the big thing, because there really isn't there isn't a diplomatic response in the game. There's just they're cheating. Call a judge.
Yeah. And if somebody doesn't call them on it, and you don't have to be rude about it, you don't have to be a jerk about it, just call a judge, be like, hey dude, can you roll your dice so I can see them? And if it continues to be an issue and it starts to, you start to go, okay, this is fishy, like your luck's way too good, then you just say, call a judge, because you've already asked, you've been nice about it, you've given them a chance to show you that no, it's not that there's anything weird going on. It's just that my luck has been really good, or sorry, I didn't even think about it. I'm playing fast and grabbing dice before you get a chance to see them. Let me do this a little slower. But as soon as they're actively avoiding letting you see dice, or actively, trying to pick things up too fast, or whatever might be the case, like at that point, you gave them a shot. You tried to do the diplomatic thing. Call the judge, because if you don't,
absolutely,
every opponent after you has that same mindset, then by the end of it,
they make it to the top tables.
Yeah, they can make it to the top table and wind up winning, and people who deserved to be in that spot, or top 4 or whatever, deserve to be in that spot, aren't there because somebody was cheating and no one called them on it. And it's just,
well, yeah, and I think that one's a nice cut and dry one. But if we were to go back to the invalidator, this is where it gets a little tricky.
Yeah, so that one, honestly, this probably isn't all that helpful in terms of advice, but that one, the easiest way to deal with it for me is just ignore it. Like I at that point, for context, I always try to make sure that my opponents are having fun too. That's a big part of it for me, is if I'm if I'm playing a game and my opponent just seems like they're having a really just not fun game, even if I'm winning it, I'm still going to try and make it fun for them, whether that's through, talking about whatever in the middle of the game, or like getting excited for their successes, even if it's bad for me. Like there's lots of ways you can do that. But when I come up against somebody who's pulling that sort of thing with that sort of attitude that we talked about, the invalidator, I just go straight to business. Like I'm not going to actively try and take away from your fun, but I'm not going to actively try and contribute to it either. I'm going to play the game and I'm going to try and get it done with, because it doesn't matter how hard I try and how much effort I put in to try and make you have a good time. You're not going to reciprocate that. And on top of that, no matter what I do, if you're having a bad time, you're going to blame me for it. So at the worst, you're not going to care if I'm trying to show you, or at the best, you're not going to care that I'm trying to make sure you have a good time. At the worst, you're going to think I'm being smug and get angry about it, and then we're going to have an even worse situation.
Yeah, that's fair. So just kind of not paying it any heed and just, doing your best to get through your turns as quick as you can. And then hopefully the game is mercifully short.
Yeah. It goes back to something that, I've learned many, many times in different customer service roles, from retail all the way up through, the professional level, working with huge clients, is some people are just always going to look for a reason to be unhappy. And you can't fix that.
Yep. Yeah, that is definitely the case. I mean, it's the age old, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink thing. Whether you're talking, is somebody getting help for something that they need help with, or whether you're talking about somebody choosing to be a bad sport, at the end of the day, they've got to want to have a good time, or they're not going to have a good time.
Yep, exactly.
So, and if they've come to the game thinking this is going to suck, or I'm just, my codex isn't great, and you're playing a broken one, if they've already come to the game like that, there's not a whole lot you can do. And obviously, try to be a good sport and try to put that out there, but at a certain point you have to just tell yourself, like, I can't have fun for both of us, so I'm just going to have the most fun I can, salvage this game, and just get through it.
Yep, exactly.
So kind of along the lines of what you've experienced, one of my that guy experiences, and maybe this is colored by my history in martial arts, but there's kind of a tenet in martial arts of, you let your opponent set the tone of the free sparring. And so if you're putting on gloves and squaring off with your opponent, you're just kind of, just tapping each other pretty lightly, and then somebody just drills the other one, we tend not to like stop everything and go, hey, whoa, that was too hard. What we tend to do is go, oh, that's how hard we're going. And so your opponent sets that tone. And so the way I tend to respond to that guy type situations personally is, I keep my own ethics and integrity in mind. Like, I'm not going to stoop to their level as far as like cheating or things like that.
Right.
But if I square up at the table with an opponent, and right out of the gate, they are, pushing creatively pushing the boundaries of the interpretation of rules, or like seem to be, edging a little bit of extra movement, or, when you just start to see the little signs, what that does for me is like, okay, all right, well, if you want to win that bad, all right. Like, if it's something that I cannot objectively point to as cheating, but it's like really dancing that line, my response is to take off like the governor as far as like any form of like mercy, or any form of like, okay, you've decided that we're playing to win and fun isn't the objective here.
Exactly.
And I certainly want to enjoy the game, but I will admit some of my enjoyment of the game is going to be beating somebody who wanted it bad enough that they were pushing the edge of cheating. And that tends to be how I'll react to if I have an opponent that's doing the cocked dice thing I referred to earlier, where it's like, okay, they are re-rolling their cocked dice, but like sometimes I'm watching them ignore a cocked die that's showing a 5 or a 6 when they should have re-rolled it. In those instances, I'm not super quick to be like, well, I'm going to call a judge because you're cheating your dice.
Right.
In those instances, I'm like, oh, so you have blurry ethics. I can have blurry ethics. And I never go to the point of cheating, but I do go to the point of like discompassion
Yeah.
or whatever, or lack of compassion or whatever you want to, whatever's the grammatically correct way of saying it. So at that point, I'll just put it in fifth gear and play as absolutely hard as I can. And if I lose, oh well, like I don't walk away from it going, well, I played super hard and I lost, so they must have been cheating. Like, no, I just like that was the tone of the game. Like to me, I don't lose any sleep over it. It's just like, oh, the tone this game was not about fun. This game was about winning. I tried to win. Most often in those situations, at least in our local meta, most often in those situations, I do all right. I tend to do all right in our local meta, and when I take the governor off and just like play hard and not care about people's feelings, I tend to do a little bit better. And when I say that, I don't mean that I'm rude. I don't mean that I'm being a bad sport. It's more of just like I pulled no punches, and like, that person has set the tone of the match, and that's what the game is. That tends to be how I handle that type of situation. And I've had a handful of games like that where it's like, okay, normally playing with this person is fun, or at least is better than not getting a game of 40K, because they're not so bad that I'd not play over it. And most of the time it's good, but oh, they're in this mood today, or that kind of thing. Then I'm like, all right, well, just let me just sharpen the claws a little bit, and I'll dance. Let's do it. So I tend to kind of do that. I also had an experience at MCM. It ended up being one of my favorite games of the tournament. I mentioned the game earlier, the one that went to the very last die roll. That game started out kind of rough. And I think that player was frustrated with some like last minute round change ups and things. And he kind of came to the table a little salty. And it seemed apparent that he was very quick to assume that I was going to be that guy. And right out of the gate, he treated me like that guy before we like really even got going.
Gotcha.
And so I was like, okay, I don't know if this person is upset because of like the change in matchups or any other thing that's going on in their life. But I certainly haven't done anything that merits being treated like this. So then I had to ask myself, like, okay, does this person treat all of their opponents like this because they themselves are, kind of that whole projection thing. Like, somebody who is that guy is probably going to be quick to accuse other people of being that guy. And so I was like, okay, it was a bit intense right out of the gate. And in that instance, because like I'm looking at it going, I don't know where this came from. Like, I don't know this person from Adam. And like, we squared up and we had a pretty cordial pregame discussion that involved like already making some like kind of sportsmanship concessions for like, let's just, it's later in the tournament. Neither of us are doing super great in the placings. Let's just have a good time. There was some of that conversation in the setup. So I was just like, wow, this is, seems kind of abrupt and odd. Like the first time I move a tank to be like, hey buddy, that's some pretty liberal movement there. I'm like, okay, well, let me back it up and show you exactly where the movement was. He's like, oh, okay, I just missed that. I'm like, oh, that's cool. Just that like hawking everything I did, like he was expecting me to cheat or expecting me to do something. But I had an answer for everything. And that's kind of part number one of how to deal with a challenging situation like that. Is always hold yourself to like the standard of good sportsmanship and playing the game correctly, but always have an answer. Because if you are facing an opponent like that, who's going to call you out on everything, or who is looking for that argument to justify, like the invalidator, to justify that your codex is broken or whatever, they're going to look to catch you with your pants down as far as like, well, what did you do here? What did you do there? So just always have an answer, like be intentional about what you're doing when you play, and like be able to calmly and politely explain yourself. Like, so I was like, okay, well, this movement that I just moved my emulator is actually shorter than it can move. And here, let me show you, like these many inches to here, and then this turn, and this many inches to here, and this turn, and this many inches to here, so I actually could have gone an inch farther, and he's like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's something that you do even when you're not trying to be that guy yourself. Like when you're playing fast at a tournament, that was a good example of somebody who might have like been picking up their dice too fast just because they were moving fast. When I measured, I held my tape over where the tank was. I measured the distance to the back of a unit, and then I measured the turn that the fender of the tank would have to make to wheel around it, and then I measured from that point forward. So like I made this like S snaking motion, measuring each little leg of the trip to make sure I could do it. And if I did that too fast and he missed it, that might have given him the impression that I was trying to cheat it. So so just being able to explain yourself calmly and politely is really important in those situations. And then after that, and then me reminding him to use his chaplain powers, or reminding him to heal something with, I think it was his apothecary or a psychic power or something. After a couple times of me like going, hey man, you forgot to, this guy didn't do anything in the psychic phase, or don't forget your chaplain, because you just, you started your movement phase, but you didn't do your chaplain stuff yet. A couple times, like he got like, oh, you're not that guy. You're not you're not like a grumpy, cutthroat tournament player. Like you're actually like, then once he saw those like offerings of like, look, like, I don't want you to lose because you forgot to do something. He softened, and then from battle round 2 on, maybe bottom of 2 on, he was one of the best opponents I had the whole time. But he certainly came to the table either in his own that guy mode, or just assuming out of the gate I was going to be that guy.
Right.
And so that game started kind of rocky, and I was like, oh, it's going to be one of these kind of games. Great. That's awesome. But I just, and this kind of gets to my point of how to deal with it, I guess, is I stuck to my guns and just stayed. Kind of like you were saying, trying to help your opponent have as much fun as possible. Like it was apparent he was upset. And because I didn't do anything to make him upset, I was just trying to go out of my way to make sure he was having a good time. And, but I also, for a lack of sounding like, I don't know, harsh about it or whatever, I also didn't take his shit. I mean, that's, that was basically it. He was frustrated, and he was like, hawking everything I was doing. And I was just like, and I never was like, hey dude, back off. I just was like, no, here's the answer. Like I will be validated by the truth. So there's the answer. And just that, like that calm countenance, and even if he was being salty, still offering him the consideration of, I'm not going to go like, well, you forgot your psychic phase and you're being a jerk, so screw you. And that's where when I was talking about my first that guy experience, that's where my personal ethics stop me from, like, when I get in that mode of like, oh, we're playing to win, there are still lines you don't cross. Like I don't want to win because you forgot your shooting phase, or whatever, or you were too excited about a charge, so you like skipped shooting your weapons on this other thing, or whatever. Like, so even when an opponent puts me in that mode of like, oh, okay, you set the tone of the match and we're doing this, like claws out, let's do it. Even then you have to hold yourself to your own personal standard of like, I want to win, but I don't want to win that way. And that attitude really, really helped me deal with the second example I gave, because out of the gate, he was grouchy, and I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to have an answer for everything that I do. And I'm going to be me, and I'm going to do my best to make sure that everybody's having fun. And it worked. Thankfully, it might not have on somebody else, but it worked with him. And we had a game that literally came down to, went all the way to turn 5, came down to his last charge against the last character to cap out his assassinate points on the last objective, and I failed her last wound on the last save. Like it was just like it really went down to The Wire, and it was one of my most fun games of the tournament. And had I just decided at the beginning of the game, like, well, this dude's a tool, like whatever, I'm not gonna have any fun, I would have been robbed of like my favorite game of the tournament.
Yeah, exactly.
So even, I guess that's my punchline is, even if you do find yourself facing that guy, try to make it the best game you can.
Yep.
Because maybe they don't realize they're acting that way, or maybe they don't want to be that way. Maybe they misread something you did. And if you just put a little bit of extra effort into trying, then you might salvage the whole game and might turn that person around. So it's always worth putting the effort into trying.
Yeah.
But that said, if it doesn't work, crush them.
Yeah.
The look Nate gave me when I said that.
No, I mean, I think it points to a really great maxim that you hear frequently, and it's the idea that don't attribute things to malice when they could easily be attributed to ignorance. Like,
yeah,
never go in assuming that someone's trying to screw you out of a win, but if it becomes clear that they are, don't stand for it. But
yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
Otherwise, it's. I mean, I know there are times where I get halfway through something, go, oh, shoot, I forgot this, and generally it's either, you know what, that was my bad, I'm not gonna go back and do it, or my opponent might go, no, do it, it's fine, and it's great. There are also times where I go, okay, and then this, and they go, well, no, this thing, and it seems like something really obvious, but it's just something that I had totally glossed over for whatever reason. I forgot that there was a rule. I forgot that there was, I miscounted a point. I did something, I had a stat wrong for their toughness or my save or whatever. And it happens to everyone. I mean, it's never because I'm trying to cheat somebody out of something. It's just sometimes there's a lot going on, and frankly, I have trouble keeping most things in my personal life straight anyway. So on top of that, all the extra rules of 40K and everything, it's easy for me to every once in a while go, whoops, I was thinking of something else. I'm really sorry about that. That's my bad. And I've never had an issue with it.
Mm-hmm.
So don't have an issue with it when it's clearly like 95% of the time the game is fun and everyone's being cool about it, and there's no indication of malice, and somebody just honestly forgets something. Don't immediately jump to this accusatory, like, oh, you're trying to cheat kind of thing. Like that's the quickest way to take a game that otherwise could be a lot of fun and turn it into a game of nobody trusts anybody to actually be trying to play by the rules.
Yeah.
I
think.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
It's just there's that kind of that level of observation where you really have to read the room. You very quickly, the vast majority of the time, are going to realize when someone's being sneaky and when someone is playing to intentionally take advantage of you or the rules or whatever situation, versus when somebody forgets a rule or forgets to do a thing. And and kind of like you mentioned with your opponent sets the tone of the fight. In my experience, at least most of the time, if your opponent is pretty forgiving about a lot of that stuff and doesn't have an issue with it, and you are the same, you're not going to have an issue. Like there's not going to be a problem. It's when, if you make make one of those mistakes and your opponent immediately starts calling you on it, then at the same time you got to start watching them, because if they're going to be, like you said, hawking everything that you're doing, that means that somewhere they're paying attention enough and they're concerned enough about getting screwed over that either they are just not having a good time, frankly. They just came to the table expecting to play against somebody that they didn't want to play against, or they know that it's something that you could call them on. So if they start calling you on it, it's a distraction.
Yeah. Or it's an attempt to claim the upper hand of moral superiority. So, this is another topic that we could talk about for hours. We really could. So I will, I'll try to bring us to a close with, top, what is your most, I guess, like, sportsmanship pet peeve?
Ooh.
Like, so what is the thing that it doesn't even have to be like the worst thing that somebody can do, just more of like, what's something that people do in sportsmanship that just rubs you the wrong way?
So this is a thing that I've seen a lot of people do. I think a lot of people don't even realize they're doing it, but in my opinion, it is something you just flat out shouldn't do, and that is you should never take dice results that weren't intentionally rolled. So if you're shaking up a handful of 12 dice and one of them slips out and lands on the table and it happens to be the number that you need, re-roll it. You didn't actually roll the die. It fell out of your hand when you were getting ready to roll it. I get that it was the number you need, but re-roll it. Roll everything as a group, because then when it comes up and it's not the number you need, a lot of people who don't do that re-roll will re-roll the one they don't want. And
it's like the cock dice thing.
Yep. Exactly. and that's I mean, cocked dice, I can kind of see the argument depending on how badly cocked it is. There's obviously a little bit of wiggle room there in terms of, okay, well, is it a 45-degree angle? Is it an 80-degree angle? What's cocked, what's not? I usually err on the side of if it looks like it's cocked, it's probably cocked. If it's slightly tilted and clearly it should be a result, that's one thing. But if it's standing up on one edge, obviously it needs to be re-rolled. But when a die shoots out of your hands and goes halfway across the table and lands and it happens to be a 6, you don't go, oh yeah, so there's the 6 and then here's the other 11 dice. Like, no, you go, oh shoot, grab the other dice and roll 12 dice.
Yeah. Well, the outcome on the die should not influence the judgment of whether or not it was rolled or not.
Exactly.
Is ultimately what it comes to. No, I think that's good. I think my pet peeve in the sportsmanship realm is many times I'll say to somebody that I would rather concede a game I know I've lost and re-rack and play again and have a good time, or just offer like, hey, you like, I'm not saying to just give up when a game is going poorly, but when you're looking at the board going, I can't win this, I personally think it's good sportsmanship to be willing to go, you know what, let me save us both the time. You beat me, good game, man. This is why I don't think I can come back. Why don't you either grab another opponent or let's go grab a drink real quick and play again or whatever.
For sure.
Because playing it out to the last isn't necessary to me. Now if it's a tournament or something where how many victory points they're earning depends, is the game, then you stay into it to give them their fair due. Like, if they're busting you up like a piñata, you need to stay so that they can get the candy out of it. You know what I mean? Like that's, because that affects their standing. But if you're playing a pickup game or something like that, once you've lost, and I don't mean like you think you've lost, like when the math says you've lost, it is totally fine to concede. Where my pet peeve comes in is there is almost no way to offer your opponent a surrender and not sound like a jerk. And so while I think it is good sportsmanship to concede when you've solidly lost to save everybody the time, to offer surrender to your opponent, it's very difficult for that to not come across very smugly or very cocky or very condescending or whatever. And so if your opponent's having a rough go or it looks like they can't come back from it, saying like, if you were to say, hey, man, you're having a rough, your dice are just, there's just something, or your dice are betraying you or whatever. If you want to commiserate with them, to try to like lessen their frustration. Or if you wanted to offer like, hey, you know what, next time we play, you know, let's do a different mission, because maybe the mission had a lot to do with it or something like that. If you want to kind of like coach in the direction of we could play again or whatever, or if you're just trying to like diplomatically like deflect from the fact that the person's really bummed at how the game is going, I'm not taking any issue with things that look a lot like offering a surrender, but just to straight up say, you want to call it?
Yep.
Or to say like, well, I've obviously won, so you want to save us the time? Or, you know, those kind of, you know, so I guess that's my pet peeve. It is good sportsmanship to go, you have beaten me. Would you like to save the time? And I'll just, you know, good game, man. Good sportsmanship. I've obviously beaten you. Do you want to call it? Bad sportsmanship. I mean, obviously context is king. And you know, your relationship with your opponent, if it's a buddy that you play a million times a week, you know, and that's the language you use to talk to each other, right, that's obviously context is king, right? But when you're talking random pickup games, offer an honorable surrender when you know you've lost, but always give your opponent the honor of letting them try to win if they think they can. And to me, that's just a huge pet peeve of mine.
Yeah.
So that would be my big one.
I'm glad you said that, because that was my second one, and I went with the dice instead. So perfect.
Cool. So we hit both bases.
Yeah.
So we've got a lot of things coming up. We alluded earlier to Choosers of the Slain events. We're starting up a crusade. We'll have more information on that next episode. We're also looking into the not so distant future for maybe a little competitive action brought to you by Choosers of the Slain. So stay tuned for that. And the best way to get this information, as always, is to join our Discord. There'll be a link in the description of this video, and I will make my offering to the YouTube algorithm and say like, share, and subscribe if you enjoy this content. It definitely will help us out.
Yeah. It really helps us a lot.
Yes, it does all the arcane eldritch magic in the analytics and things, and so click all the clicky buttons if you like what we're doing.
Yes,
except for the one that looks like a thumbs down.
Yeah, don't do that one. It directly counteracts all the good things.
So. Yes, it does. But more importantly than the altar of YouTube, join us on Discord, because that's where all the conversations are happening. We do list discussions, we do tactics, we talk about news. It's not just for, you know, our local meta. It is competitive 40K. It's lore based. We got guys talking about the novels. We have people posting pictures of their hobby works in progress. Just come be part of the fun with us at the Choosers of the Slain Discord. We would love to have you.
For sure. Absolutely. I think on that note, we're probably good to sign off for this episode. So
I think so.
We will see you all next time, and thanks for listening.
Stay safe out there.